Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the Transformational Learning Summit.
Thank you, Lorenzo. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm really excited for our conversation today because you are one of the few people I've met that operates at this intersection of humanity and technology, particularly VR, which I feel holds really interesting promise for really the capacity to cultivate humanity. But before we maybe get into the depth of VR, I always like to start with this question of what does transformation mean to you?
What does what mean to me?
Transformation.
Transformation. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, beautiful words. What does transformation mean to me? I think it's interesting to look at the word itself and look at the two halves. Like if you split it in trans and formation, I believe that formation is already something that is evolving, as like a rock forms itself over like millennia of time as humans form themselves. It's always a process, it's always in motion. There's never like an established finished product.
Mm.
Um, and that also shouldn't be the case with transformation, because it's, to me, it's basically um, the process of becoming from one form to the next. Um, and then the trends is also just making it more obvious. I
Mm.
believe in the word of transformation. It's about this process of transcending into something or transforming into something. It's being in flux, it's evolving. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's what I leave in the middle. The word in itself of transformation, I believe the word in itself carries the essence.
I'd love to maybe start with a little bit of an understanding of how you came to this path of integration with technology and this deep interest in humanity.
Um, let's say it started when I was 4 years old, and I started to have of having concepts. And I don't know, I just feel like I always had this inclination of thinking about our world and like the states of beings and evolution. Like I was just thinking about the things that are unseen, since as long as I can remember. But what really accelerated my path was when my parents divorced when I was 14 years old, and it caused a lot of suffering for me personally. And suffering for me was a really good drive to dive deeper into the questions like why am I suffering? What's going on here?
Mm.
And eventually I ended up studying psychology with the intention of becoming a clinical psychologist. Oh man, a clinical psychologist. Um, because I just wanted to understand like the nature and the depths of the human mind. I was deeply intrigued by how we come to our emotions and what's happening under the hood of our human outer shell. And then eventually I decided to not follow the path of becoming a clinical therapeutic psychologist. So I went for organizational psychology instead. Still from the same passion, but I just felt like, why wouldn't I go to people who are like relatively healthy and happy at a platform we call work, instead of going where people are already like a little bit further down the rabbit hole and in need of a bit more support of a licensed psychological therapist. So I thought I could better use my energy, my time, by focusing on people within an organization where we could have a reach to many people and supporting them in becoming healthy and thriving, even more than they already are. And then I actually joined the world of work myself, starting at Deloitte in Belgium. That's about 7 years ago now. And I got my self-lived experience, like the embodiment of what it is to be in a platform of work, which was very intriguing, very inspiring, but also caused a fair amount of suffering. And I realized pretty soon that there is a lot of transformation that would be beneficial to happen for the the paradigm of work that we find ourselves in now. And that led me to move all the way to Prague after I connected with a very like-minded spirit, Ledena Edwards, who was a partner at Deloitte in Czech Republic at the time. So we managed to convince our CEO, Diana, back then to establish a new team on transformational leadership.
Mm.
In the meantime, I should mention, because your question was about technology as well, like this intersection is where it gets really interesting to me. I was put into a VR headset in 2017. And that experience completely blew my mind. I was an eagle flying through the streets in Paris, and it was such like a basic experience in itself, if you think of it. But um, it just made me feel like I was the eagle and I was flying. And after I
Mm.
took off the headset, I still felt I wasn't fully in my body. I wasn't fully in real reality, whatever that is. So it had a profound impact on my experience of reality. And since then, I just couldn't stop thinking, what if we can find other ways to support this shift in awareness, in consciousness, a shift in being through the use of technology like this? And so I became pretty much a maniac in Deloitte. People started to call me Mr. VR guy or the VR guy. Um, and it was always with the intention to use this technology for, yeah, a shift in consciousness, a shift in being, or transformation.
Mm.
And combine that with my psychology and also a realization I had during a year-long travel that I did between when I graduated and when I started working at Deloitte. I realized that healthy societies and very messed up societies, I'm talking about, for example, Cambodia after the genocide with the Red Khmer, they have two things in common. That it's leadership and education, at least in my perspective,
Mm.
uh, that dictates or that has a very big influence in how that society thrives or perishes. So during those travels, I made it clear to myself those are the two areas that I wanted to put my focus into. So leadership and education in the broadest sense of the word. So combining that with my psychology background, with my passion and affinity for technology, that's a very long answer to your question,
Mm.
but it gives you all the context you need for
Mm.
why I find myself so intrigued by this intersection of
Mm.
technology, psychology, human flourishing.
I love that. And it's really interesting because often we think about, or people talk about how technology can disconnect us from ourselves or from other people. And so the prospect of putting on a headset to possibly connect more deeply or to have an opportunity to practice a way of being in a safe space is really interesting. I'd love to open that up a little bit. And what are some of the things that you've discovered in this territory of VR and learning?
Yeah, so a really interesting example that I would like to start off with is the emergence of virtual worlds and social VR, where anyone with a headset can basically jump into any platform like um, big screen VR when it was still a cinema, or Altspace, or like there's so many of these platforms where people can just find connection with an avatar where there is a real person behind it. And
Mm.
all of these platforms are a little bit different, but they share the one same thing that you can bump into random people and have random interactions with them, meaningful interactions, sometimes not so meaningful interactions. Like I don't want to get it too much into enhanced cyber crime or harassment in VR. But it basically just opens up a whole gateway of expanded human interaction. And what I find interesting is that it's almost like putting on like a suit or a costume and taking on a different personality or playing a different role or escaping, breaking free from your current identity. And in a
Mm,
way, that is to me like a deep way of learning something different about yourself or expanding yourself beyond like the confines of who you believe you are and should be. So in that sense, I find especially VR provides an opportunity to reinvent yourself and play with different states of being, interact with people in a different way, because they don't know who you are. You are like a panda bear or a walking stick of butter. Like it can be anything really.
mm,
You can sit on the edge of a cliff together with someone, have a deep, meaningful conversation about life, or talk about something that just happened to you. So that in itself, for me, it's not guided learning or it's not imposed by your learning manager. Um, it's not tracked in any LMS, but it does provide people with an opportunity to experience and expand their way of being.
mm.
Uh, yeah,
So and there's different. I imagine there's different dimensions to one in a social environment where you're interacting with other humans, and two in an environment where you're interacting with a virtual person, a person who is basically an avatar without a human being behind it.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah,
can you expand on that a little?
of course, we did an experiment when I was at Deloitte in Czech Republic with avatars where there was no human, like a real human being behind it. And of course, like it was driven by a certain degree of AI even back then. A part of it was also scripted. It was basically a training in social emotional intelligence. And you had to sit down for having a conversation with Chris, who was one of your employees. And he came to you because he felt overwhelmed with the project deadlines. And then there was this kind of branched scenario where you would have a conversation, and based on the responses you picked, you had like multiple choice A, B, C to pick from that would guide the conversation a certain way. And while it was obvious that the conversation was scripted to some degree and there was no real human involved, still people felt connected. According to the responses, people did feel connected to the avatar. They felt emotionally bought into the scenario and the setting. And they felt even some emotions coming up when they gave like a wrong answer and Chris became a little defensive. People felt it having a physical emotional reaction to
Mm,
themselves. So I don't believe that we are yet there from a technological perspective that AI avatars in VR are as credible as like when there is a real person behind it. Although we are getting there quite quickly. And that also poses a lot of new questions. But at this point in time, it even provides like a different gateway into self-discovery and learning, just because of the fact that you know no one is watching you, but at the same time, you already have a visceral response to whatever this non-personal avatar is saying to you. So that's even something interesting that is not replicable in real life, because you don't get to sit down talking to like a non-human entity, but getting a human interaction out of it is a very intriguing combination.
What are some of the most interesting applications that you see emerging around what becomes possible?
I mean, soft skills training is the one that is top of mind with everyone, of course,
Hmm.
because there's many platforms already out there which provide one way, like to some degree, very immersive environment to hone your, like, I don't like to call them soft skills, I like to call them human capabilities because they're
Mm,
not soft and they're not skills. Um, but you can practice a lot of different like capabilities that are more human in nature. Like critical thinking, you can engage in a conversation with Albert Einstein. To practice being more charismatic, you can enter the room with Barack Obama and practice some of his tricks because those personalities just inspire this part of yourself. Mel Slater is the researcher who came up with this idea. Um, human capabilities slash soft skills is an interesting one. Um, if we're talking about learning in the broader scope, procedural training is also very interesting in a number of scenarios when the task at hand is either very expensive to learn or very rare to learn in a real environment. Like flying an astronaut to the moon.
Mm,
NASA started with VR more than 30 years ago because it was much cheaper to simulate these kind of environments than actually flying someone like a little bit into space. Cleaning power grids is another one where there is a high risk of failure or even death or
mm.
damage. Oh, I see my PC, my technology
Nice.
is simplifying. Um, for those tasks that are high risk, very rare or very expensive, or just not safe, those are the ones that are very like beneficial to train in VR.
Hmm. Can you walk me through an example of how you've seen some organizations do, say, soft skills development, how that actually has worked and some of the data around the efficacy?
Yes, there is an early example of a friend of mine at Novartis who deployed a certain provider of soft skills training, and they did a small scale pilot back then. I believe it was 2018, 19. Um, and the results were mixed. I don't believe they continued or they scaled the pilot because the investment in the technology wasn't as interesting because it didn't fully replace the alternatives they already had. So still people could go through a soft skills training on their PC screen. It wasn't full-blown immersive VR, but it was an avatar. It was a certain scenario. Um, I just don't believe that it back then in the time it provided as big of an additional benefit over the in-person trainings or the even e-learnings that they had available. But I've seen a couple of really successful examples as well. For example, the Hilton hotels. In the US, they deployed VR soft skills training um, for their receptionists for improving their empathy.
Mhm.
This is my partner, Mitchell, walking in the and hello everyone. So the in Hilton, it actually boosted the hospitality services and the extent of empathy that their employees were able to extend to the visitors.
Hmm.
Uh,
So they actually measured, they saw measurable improvement on the way that their employees interacted with customers.
yes, they did.
Mm.
I would have to look up the article again to tell you the exact measures and the percentages, but it's very
Mhm.
easy to find it online. It's the same with Boeing. They also employed it for more procedural training. In Walmart, they also employed it for customer centricity. So there's a couple of like big examples out there of organizations who have done this at scale. But the results, I would have to look at it
Mm.
myself. It's been a little while since I last looked at them.
And what about leadership development? Have you seen a lot of VR application around? I mean, I'm assuming there's a broad spectrum from middle management to upper management. I would guess it's maybe less than upper management because there's a higher budget for personal coaching there. But I'm curious about some how how you see that territory evolving.
Yeah, that's a really interesting realm, and I would say it's a little, I mean, it's emerging, so it's not very established at this point. The examples are rather scarce or scarce, and the ones that I have seen, I'm not sure about the long-lasting impacts of them, but I feel like like there are certain areas where there is potential for inspiring healthier ways of leadership, more connecting leadership. And I'll give you a very practical example. When I was in Rotterdam during Immersive Tech Week, it's one of the biggest European-based conferences for immersive tech. There was a lady, her name is Laura Kitanen, and she is experimenting with the platform Spatial, which allows you to build virtual worlds to put participants inside of it using VR, laptops, desktops, mobile. But she uses virtual reality because it's much more immersive. And the way she uses it for is to make people very present with each other because there's literally no distractions. When I
Mm.
say people, this is senior leadership, teams of bigger organizations, because it's very rare to find the time to really sit with each other without distractions and have like a fair amount of time together to explore something that isn't focused on KPIs or revenue or financials. So that in itself is already a benefit. But then she created rooms with a campfire where people could sit together, and she uses more traditional coaching formats, but with the addition of like immersive campfires or rooms with water. And then she even uses scents, like with perfume sticks, to wave into people's direction. So you even have the sensory stimulation
Mm.
on top of the visual
So
information and
she's in the room with people while they're wearing the headset, and they
exactly,
might see a
exactly.
campfire. It's not like they're sitting across from another virtual avatar. They're sitting in an immersive environment where they just have an opportunity to basically meditate.
Yes, yes,
Mm.
indeed. And VR provides a very potent gateway into meditation, even if you don't have any prior experience,
Mm.
because it makes you so present. It even disorients you a bit because most people are not used sitting in VR.
It's like
Um,
being in a sensory deprivation chamber almost, because you're just
yeah,
totally
kind of.
like you're kind of in an alternate universe.
Yes, and because you can influence what you see and what you don't see in the
Mm.
environment, you can enhance the experience to optimize flow, meditative states. There's one company that does this very well. They're called Trip with two P's, Trip.
Trip,
Um,
TR
yes,
or okay, TRIPP.
TRIPP.
Mm.
Yeah. And I had the pleasure of meeting their founder and business development guy, Nania and Mani, and they're wonderful people. And
Mm.
they were trailblazing back then. I think that was 2017. And they already had their company. They already had a working solution. And even now, 6 years later, 7 years later, I should say, we're 2024 now. Um, they've developed it into something which is heavily science or evidence based, based on a lot of insights from flow research and meditation research, and even gamification, because that also has like ways of optimizing flow. So, applying that to leadership development, there is a lot of ways that we can use those age-old wisdoms and techniques to amplify those with a visually enhanced environment, to create more connection, more awareness, more groundedness.
Mm. So in this case, it's a headset experience that helps you basically center and connect to something that might be called a deeper state of inner flow.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's using sound and visual. So I imagine maybe some sort of binaural sound
Yeah,
structure
I'm
that.
glad you mentioned that because that was also
Mm.
part of it.
Mm.
And the additional benefit on top of that is that once you get into this deeper, more connected state of being, you also have a 3D environment to capture IDs. What I really like about this one platform, Spatial, is that there's this virtual room that you have. You can limit access to only the people who should be having access to it, and you can capture IDs.
What do you mean
Whether
by IDs?
you have a post-it and you write your
Oh,
IDs on a
ideas,
post-it.
ideas. Okay, got it. I
Yeah,
thought you
IDs.
meant like user ID. Gotcha.
Oh, sorry, it's my
Yeah.
Belgian check.
No, it's got it.
Um, so you can also capture like pictures or videos, like you can express a lot of
Mm.
information that you wish to bundle together in a room, um, to just, yeah, basically express some of the wisdom that you collectively find as a leadership team in this state. And it's easy to share that information or that expression afterwards. Like you could even go a little bit more crazy and draw certain things. There are special apps for that as well. To some extent, you can also do that in Spatial. So it just allows you to be more creative, to be more fully expressed in a way that's not even possible in real life because you cannot just draw something in the middle of the room and come back next time and see that it's still there. And
Mm,
that's the opportunity that this new immersive technology is bringing us, and that we can play with this unique blend of the physical space and all the options that the virtual world provides us that are not necessarily possible within the constraints of the real physics of
mm.
real.
So in just to clarify, because I feel like this is such an interesting territory, often when we think of, or I don't know what people often think of um, when I think of the possibility of VR, most of it revolves around um, having a conversational avatar partner or something like that to be able to maybe practice different ways of responding or being. But this idea of being in an immersive environment that is designed to make you more attuned to some sort of internal creative or flow-like state, and then the possibility of that also being a social space where you have other um, uh, colleagues who or peers who are somehow similarly being attuned, and then there's an opportunity to collaborate. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a great summary. Yes.
Mm, mhm. That's cool. And so what's the um like what's the current state of that territory? Is that something that do you see that being um, in early experimental stages inside an organizational context? Is it something that's already well developed and some organizations are doing a lot of it? Like where are we at with this kind of technology?
I would say at this moment it is still in an experimental phase. I haven't seen a wide scale adoption of a bigger company that, I mean, I've seen some leadership initiatives, but I haven't seen a long lasting, wide scaled adoption of immersive technology for leadership development. Especially not the ones where you really leverage those components that are exclusive to, let's say, virtual reality. The ones that I mentioned, where you draw some expressions in the middle of a physical space.
Mhm.
Um, those kind of applications I haven't yet seen. Maybe they're there, but at least if you're talking to me, someone who is really looking at the recent evolutions, then that's already a sign of the maturity that the experts in the field haven't yet seen one or many companies who are actively using this at scale. Then I would say it's still in the stage that it exists. People are experimenting with it, but both on the adoption side and on the technology maturity side, things are not yet on this level where it's basically like a plug and play kind of solution. And it's also not completely proven or tested to the extent that anyone would say like, okay, this is a no-brainer. So it's
Mhm.
typically the leaders who are open to experiments because they feel like there is an inherent value to it, who would be running these kind of initiatives right now. And even as an industry, we are unpacking more of the possibilities and the potential. Because I saw like the small startup that was here in Czech Republic, and they used Tilt Brush VR, where you can draw a lot of things in like a virtual space, and they used it to overcome fears or move through traumas because you can visualize the trauma and even play with it. Like you can make it bigger, smaller, you can walk around it, you can attach certain words to it by drawing it, or you can put it in the floor and jump on it, which is
Mm,
a like a very new and fun way of dealing with anxieties, fears, traumas, hopes, emotions, basically. But it's still all in this experimental phase, in my opinion.
mm. Say a little more about that working with trauma and visualizing. How does the visualizing aspect work?
Yeah, it's almost as if you are in a sort of creative therapy session and they give you a 2D canvas to paint on.
So
Um,
you're painting, you're not like picking images from a database, you're actually kind of drawing something with, so you have a controller in your hand that
yes,
allows you to basically sketch something in 3D, or is it kind of 2D on in a 3D environment?
it's all 3D. So you have a controller, you have two
Mm,
controllers, and you Oh, look at this. That's magic. Uh,
Nice. Oh
I'm
boy.
going to make use from this version to plug in my PC
Okay.
so that we can continue the magic. And that was fun. So yeah, so you do have to
I love how we have all this augmented reality stuff coming in real time into our
right?
conversation.
The technology wants to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, in tilt brush in this example, you do have two controllers. You can draw lines, different colors, different thicknesses, different styles, from oil brush to like a pencil to basically what you can do in Paint on the PC, but then in 3D. And once you finalized a certain line, you can group objects, you can like modify them by making them smaller, bigger, changing colors, moving them through space, walking around it. So you can pretty much do anything with those creations. And if you like, you can indeed include some 3D, 2D visuals or 3D objects, um, if that helps in your creative process. But most of the focus of this particular startup was to um, create something yourself by drawing.
But specifically in the context of therapy or just more creative expression?
This one was focused on therapy to help people move through something that they feel stuck with in their life.
Mm,
Doesn't have to be like such heavy things as trauma. It can also be that I am financially struggling and I don't see my way through it. So that can be the topic of exploration. And then it's basically creative therapy inside of the VR environment. And it was interesting to see how it helped people move through those perceived obstacles. Um, because there was something about this power of having this in a 3D environment, being able to walk around the symbol that you created around financial distress or heartbreak, or whatever comes up, and to really modify it, which makes you feel like you are in the driver's seat. It's not the emotion or the obstacle that is having the power over you, because you can really take it, modify it, draw it. And that for me was the interesting piece
mm.
of this particular way of working with virtual reality.
Is there a lot of work being done right now around VR in the context of psychological support, and is there data suggesting that works well?
Yes, definitely. There is Oxford VR, which is a spin-off from Oxford University. They are, I believe, one of the first who have applied virtual reality for overcoming fear of heights. And this particular experience worked very, very well. So in the span of a couple of sessions, people were like almost completely rid of their fear of heights in most of the cases. So I believe it was something about 80% of people who went through the treatment, who significantly reduced or completely reduced, or got rid of their fear of heights. And they have a really touching video on their website of
Mm,
a person he must be like late 50s, early 60s, who had fear of heights for basically all his life. And they took a video of him before the VR intervention and after. And before, they asked him to go near a ledge where there was like a glass barricade in a shopping mall, and he couldn't even think of going there. Like he just froze and he wasn't able to go there. And after a couple of sessions in the VR environment, he just walked up, he stood there, and he was as amazed as anyone that he could just do this after having tried many different forms of therapy for overcoming this fear. This one in VR just, was like magic to him.
mm,
And that's one
amazing.
example of fear of heights. Oxford VR specifically has also invested in social phobias and schizophrenia. So they are investigating in numerous aspects of mental health, or mental struggles. I don't like to call them disorders. Just to help people live a more rich and fulfilling life. And there are many other applications, like pain management is an interesting one, for people with burn wounds, that they put you in Antarctica and give you snowballs to throw at penguins. So the game in itself is really fun. It also distracts you. And then just being on an ice cap covered in snow also just helps
Mm.
with feeling less of the burning sensations. I mean, there's plenty of other examples in this area. So this is actually a more widely used area of the potential of VR.
This is totally kind of out of left field, but there's also, and we're seeing an enormous renaissance around substance-assisted therapy. Have you seen any intersections of that where they're doing substance-assisted VR guided therapy?
Yeah, it's starting to come up.
Mm.
Interestingly, the trip company that I mentioned earlier,
With a
I
name like
believe that,
that.
yeah, exactly. It's also quite psychedelic. Once you try it,
Mm.
you come into a world where there's very vibrant colors. Sometimes there's some like giant mushrooms in the experience. And initially, their idea was to provide an alternative to LSD,
Mm.
without having to take the actual substance, just by providing the visuals and the sounds. So they diverted that idea into meditation. But I also see that this topic of psychedelic assisted therapy is coming through in virtual reality, either by trying to recreate the sensation of those psychoactive components or psychedelics, and by just using like 3D imagery and binaural sounds. Like it can even be as simple as having a YouTube video that mimics a DMT trip, which is like this more heavy drug that makes you visualize quite a lot. So there's YouTube videos that mimic these kind of visual sensations, and if you put this in YouTube VR 360 around you, it's quite
Mm.
impressive. It doesn't get you in the same state of mind, of course, as DMT, but there are some really good attempts, and I think we'll see much more of this because, as you mentioned, like there is quite a renaissance happening in this area. And I can imagine that not even having just like the visual effects and the auditory effects of a trip like this, but also having the guidance of someone as a coach within this virtual environment could be beneficial to people wanting to work through some of their traumas or some of their struggles.
Mm. What's interesting for me is that we're seeing this massive convergence and integration of all these different technologies and methodologies with with AI technology, psychology, potentially substances, and part of that is also, particularly with the AI VR technology aspect, is I imagine it's incredibly expensive to do a lot of this early stage research. So I'm curious if there's like, what is the availability for the average, or not the average, but say somebody who wants to play or experiment in this territory? Are there lower cost approaches to somehow being able to play other than just on the participant consumer side?
Yes and no. Because there is a reason why virtual reality only took off the past decade. The idea is, I would say, 17,000 years old, and probably older, when people started to draw animals on caves, trying to immerse themselves in environments. And the only reason that we now have like this revolution of immersive tech, or what some people like to call the metaverse or spatial computing, is because the technology became much more affordable. Some guy, Palmer Luckey, figured out how to put all the right components together in a cheapish way compared to the previous alternatives that would cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So right now the price of like a consumer grade headset varies between the 300 and $900. And with $400, you basically have a really good headset already. If you want to go cheaper than that, there are like alternatives like phone-based VR had its moments, but it mostly made people ill or or made them never want to touch a real VR headset. So it has some limited applications, but I would say there's no real affordable, more affordable alternative than the consumer grade headsets that we have today. Because it's still heavy equipment. I mean, you need a display, you need lenses, you need a potent chip, and that costs a bit of money. If you want an
Mm,
alternative, there are some like 3D environments that mimic some of those effects that you can experience on a desktop. Um, and in some cases, that's actually enough. I did a soft skills training once, just using a PC. That was with a company called Immersion. And I was talking to a person and I said something wrong in a coaching interview with this guy. And he got so angry at me. And I started blushing and I started panicking.
and
So,
this was a virtual, this was a bot. It wasn't a human being.
well, it was an avatar, but there was a real human being behind it.
Mm,
That's the technology that they use for now. But still, I knew it was an actor. I knew it was an
mm,
avatar. I knew
mm,
that they were putting me on the spot because it was a product demo. And still,
mm,
I felt through my desktop screen, my laptop screen, I felt hugely overwhelmed with like shame, stress, panic.
mm, mm, mm.
So in some cases, you don't even need to full immersion to get
But I
to
meant, so the
the
question I had more wasn't on the kind of participant side, but more on the creator side. If you're a coach or if you're, you know, an organization that wants to develop a kind of an immersive 3D experience or training program, or you want to somehow experiment in the space, like what's, you mentioned this company Spatial, that were what's available for somebody that wants to be on the creator side rather than the consumer side.
Yeah, great question, because we need much more creators to experiment with this technology. And what I keep telling people is that it's actually incredibly easy to get started in this new world because there are platforms that are completely free, very high quality with lots of options to customize. For example, in Spatial, um, you can just create a free account using an email address and a password. That's all that's needed. And then you have the option of several free templates to create like the virtual environment. And then it's basically drag and drop. You can
Mm,
drag and drop a PowerPoint presentation, an image, a PowerPoint slide, a video. You can also make the integration with Sketchfab, which is the largest free database of 3D objects. So within the platform, there's a direct integration, and you can just look for a unicorn, and you find, I don't know, hundreds 3D images of or models of a unicorn, and you click on it, and it's already in your space.
mm,
And that's just spatial. There are other platforms with different purposes that are equally as user-friendly and free. Um, like even Unity is not the most complicated platform, and Unity is a platform that the heavy developers use for creating games and more immersive experiences. And with a little bit of background and the will to learn, it's not too hard to create new environments and experiences. And I just like to frame this in the way that I apply this to my grandmother, because I had her in a VR headset, and she was actually able to navigate it quite easily. And she never had, like, she's 90 years old now. She never had a smartphone, never had a PC. She doesn't have Wi-Fi at her home. And if I would have to teach her how to use a PC for the basic functions, I don't think she'll really ever get it at this point. But virtual reality is a newer technology, which means the user experience is much more thought out, it's much more natural. And even
mm.
with the next generation of headsets, that's becoming even better. If you look at the Apple Vision Pro, They're using a lot of natural human interaction elements like eye gazing and finger tracking to
Mm.
help you navigate the space. So it's going to become easier and easier for people without the coding background to not only experience immersive environments, but also to create them. Because those platforms for creators are also much more accessible and much more intuitive. And that's even without mentioning AI, which is taking over a significant proportion of the heavy coding that was only like possible to do if you actually studied programming or something.
So this is one of the things that's relatively new, I think, in the last 2 years, is that AI has basically completely exploded with ChatGPT coming out. I think it was just the beginning of last year, although it feels like it's been around forever now. And so I imagine that, I mean, there's two dimensions here. Is one is the extent to which AI can help with the coding and creation of experiences, and two is the extent to which the user experience can be enhanced with an AI conversation. You know, when I'm talking to ChatGPT for a lot of conversations, the response is very, very human. So I imagine that really changes the playing field when it comes to having human-like conversational experiences with a virtual AI bot. Like, what's the state of the art in that, and how is that emerging?
Yeah, big question. It's a very big question. I'm thinking what's the most relevant way to answer this? Yeah, I believe that AI is providing so many new opportunities. The most cutting edge examples that I've seen combined with immersive environments is the integration in avatars, where you can basically talk to an avatar that's powered by GPT. And there's only like a small amount of buffer time anymore. In the beginning, it used to be like 10 to 20 seconds between when you would ask a question and get the response.
Hmm.
Right now, that's down to 2 or 3 seconds in some of the examples that I've seen. And quite a lot of these platforms that use avatars, whether it's in social worlds or in training environments, they are they already included this integration. I think it was virtual speech in the realm of L&D for soft skills training, who made the integration as the first one. And you can find many videos of them showcasing this technology on YouTube, where you basically talk to an avatar. So I would say this is still the most cutting edge, which isn't super cutting edge because it's something that we can all already imagine. Um, some of the other ideas that I've seen, but I haven't actually seen them come to fruition yet, is to have content selection based on your mood or your physiological state of being. That imagine if you are going through a learning experience in virtual reality. Those headsets nowadays, they have eye tracking. They even can come with like blood pressure or heart rate or galvanic skin response. So it can quite confidently measure what kind of physiological state you're in. And
Hmm.
we all know that depending on your physiological state, you are more open or close towards learning something new. Or you would have like a certain limit on your processing limits or attention limits. So based on your physiological states, AI could help as a technology to select the right content for you, making an adaptable learning program that is fully catered to optimizing what you can learn and what you cannot learn in this very moment, and even helping you to enhance your like conducivity to learn. So it can just remind you to take a deep breath if you're stressed or overwhelmed, and then you can prolong your learning experience. So that's an interesting one that I haven't seen been put in practice yet, but I'm very sure it will at some point with the combination
So
of set.
what you're describing there is still in the territory of theory, or it's in development, or where is that specific thing where you have an AI system that's receptive to your physical state?
Yeah, I would say it's in development because I've seen certain elements of this being developed by different people. So there is a research lab here in Czech Republic, led by Lukáš Heitmánek, and they are looking into how you can influence your physiological states by virtual environments, which of course entails measuring your physiological state before you can adapted.
Mm.
Uh, there is another experiment that was not with humans, but with mushrooms, where I saw someone putting sensors in mushrooms and creating music out of them, which in turn affects the physiological state of humans. And then as a human, you could get linked up to these sensors and make music as well based on your biosignals and
Mhm.
influence the state of the mushrooms. So, I mean, there's lots of really cool stuff
God,
going on,
that's like a whole different kind of mushroom trip.
right?
So,
Yeah.
what about so this is actually a word I just recently heard from an interview that you did a while ago, which was phygital, which is this in which I love. It's like takes me a second to actually say it, but which is really a bit of I think usually when we think of VR, it's like a headset that disconnects you from your environment, and this is more of an interface that gives you some of the benefits of VR, having some kind of digital interface, but augmented with physical reality. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. If you look at the Apple Vision Pro, that's a very obvious example where you have this kind of dial on the headset to choose between full immersion, which means you don't see anything of the real reality, only the virtual one. And when you dial down, more and more of the physical reality filters through, and you have this blended version, which we call augmented reality, where you still see the room, but you have some augmentation in the form of work instructions or navigation, or like now with the next generation of the Ray-Bans from Meta, which are their smart glasses. You, I believe you can connect to GPT using voice commands and have the answers like projected in front of you. So imagine
Mm,
you're in a conversation with someone having a discussion about whether a certain fact is true or not. You basically ask GPT, you see the text coming in front of you, and this way you're basically connected in real life to all of the information in the internet. And the opportunities are endless, obviously, but these are some of the ways that it's already happening, where this augmented layer of um, uh, not physical but virtual reality is being augmented into our real lives and is just hopefully enriching it. Some of the dystopian futures I've seen are just that there's virtual billboards everywhere you look.
mm,
Um, and luckily, we could take off those glasses. But if you think about the smartphone, we're not really taking off the smartphone, and we're still getting bombarded with ads. So there is a very dystopian side to this whole evolution as well.
mhm,
But in essence, it's possible to augment our lives for the better using all these
mm.
technologies.
What are some of your biggest concerns going into the future as AI and VR are developing, and particularly in the context of say the evolution of what learning might look like or development might look like? Do you have any concerns?
Yeah, I think the most foundational concern, both for VR and AI as a technology and the combination of it, is that almost all of the hardware and the software models come from companies who mostly rely on advertisements
Mm,
um, for revenue. Not all of them, of course. Microsoft is an exception, but they rely on some other revenue models, and they're not always having the best intentions at heart of the end customer. I heard someone say, I don't know if it's absolutely true or not, and there is some grain of truth in it, I believe, but that the Microsoft services are basically targeted to sell to the CTOs or the CFOs or any of the leaders. But it's not actually targeted to the people using it day to day as much.
mm,
Uh, so that's where I mean, just to make the point that the business models behind the companies creating and marketing and scaling this technology aren't always the ones that will yield the best societal benefits. And concretely, I'm worried about the impact of AI to start with, because that's basically our filter. As Google is our filter now to look up information on the
mhm,
internet, AI has inherent bias based on the data that they train themselves on. Then there's other bias. Like I don't want to go into too much technical detail, but
Mhm.
basically the filter that we will get through AI on the information we get from the world will also determine our perspectives and our opinions and even our actions. Uh,
Mhm.
if you look at the news, the same can be said about the war in Gaza. That depending on which information you get, you're more likely to support Israel versus Palestine.
Mhm.
Uh, and this will only get amplified if we are not being mindful about how we build AI models and how we also teach people how to use these kind of technologies. And if we put immersive tech into the mix with VR, AR headsets, and everything in between, that just amplifies the whole experience. Because if you see a car crash on TV, it can scare you, but if you see it in VR, it will traumatize you, because you feel that it's almost as real as in real life.
Mhm.
And what also worries me is that there are a lot of children using these technologies. I would say it's even mostly children using virtual reality and also cheating on their homework with GPT. And those are the people who are, or the like, children are just like this age segment that's even more vulnerable because they haven't had as much time as we had to become aware of all the potential risks. Um, and they also take virtual reality much more serious, that to the extent that they're less able to distinguish between what happens in real reality versus what happens in virtual reality. So I would say my main concerns are mostly in AI because that's our gateway in how we perceive information from the world, and that just gets amplified through virtual reality.
It's really interesting what you say about the source of truth that we might get from AI, and also how one of the ways I've noticed myself using AI as a counterpoint to say Google is because the quality of results that I now get from Google has diminished so much over the last, I'd say, decade, that it's just so ad driven and so optimized for the SEO that it feels so um, not substantive, and AI kind of helps me cut through that. I can talk to AI and get one response that feels much more authoritative, but the risk of that is that there's one response that carries its particular bias of authority, and if you're not mindful of that authority, particularly around a polarizing issue like Russia Ukraine or Palestine Israel, or take your global political issue of choice, um, it's very hard to carry that nuance. It's very hard for an AI system to respond in a way that may be truly neutral rather than biased towards some sort of orientation. And I think it's, as a consumer, I would imagine it's really easy to overlook that bias.
Yes, and to the extent that AI models, at least GPT right now, is built in a way that it gives you the most satisfactory response as quickly as possible.
Mm,
And I believe that as humans, we have these belief systems. I like to call them planets of belief because we have some areas in our lives that we form certain opinions or beliefs around. And the more information we feed into that, the stronger we become opinionated and the stronger we buy into our perspective, our vision of reality. And the danger in AI tools is that they start to know us over time. And they're also built to basically reinforce our beliefs to give us satisfactory answers. And it's already the case with AI algorithms in your Facebook
mm,
and Instagram feeds. And this is only going to become more intense, and even with the layer of objectivity, because it's like the smart AI model telling you the truth, but the truth is nonetheless biased towards your perspective because it wants to satisfy you as quickly as possible.
mm.
So there are ways that we can design it differently, of course, but the way that we build our portals to information um, has a very big potential to just um, building our planets of belief bigger and bigger and bigger, so that the ideas that fit in they gravitate more strongly towards these planets because they get a stronger gravitational pull, rather than the ideas that might be conflicting. And this is only just strengthened by the tools that I see coming up now in the realm of AI.
Mm-hmm. So I want to bring it back to something. I mean, I think we've maybe vaguely touched, but this territory of embodiment and virtual reality, and because it feels like when you're in a headset, you're basically disconnected from your body. And a big part of, for me, about the transformational potential of a relational or a social space is this sense of, you know, feeling another person, or even with any kind of information, it's kind of feeling how that information lands in you. And I wonder what you've seen in this territory of, I mean, we talked about the overcoming fear of heights, which is, you know, probably a response that comes up in your body that you're somehow able to retrain in some way. But I wonder your reflections on what you're seeing as far as like virtual reality and the relationship to that a person then has to their body in that space, or to the
Mhm.
body of another person, being able to kind of sense and feel another person. Is that anywhere in the realm of possibility as far as what we're talking about?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sorry, one of the biggest premises of VR in the early days, I mean, 5 years ago, was
The early
VR
days.
empathy machine, right? That's why we call it emerging tech, right? So the early days of 5 years ago, empathy VR was often referenced to as an empathy machine. My two favorite researchers in this realm are Mel Slater and his associate Domna Banaku, and they've done a lot of research in this area of embodiment in immersive
Can you say those
environment.
names again?
Yes, Mel Slater
Hmm.
and Domna Banaku.
Okay.
They're very, very like smart about how they set up their designs, and it's very like worthwhile to check them out. They also have some videos on YouTube of their experiments. There is a
Hmm.
very cool one where you get to sit across of Freud and basically give therapy to yourself by
You get
pressing
to sit across from who?
Sigmund Freud.
Okay. Okay, cool.
And the trick is that, yeah, I'm straying a bit from the answer, but I'll get back to it.
Hmm.
So back to Freud is that you are at the table sitting across of Mr. Freud, and you state a problem you have, then you press a button and you become Freud. And you hear yourself as an avatar talking to you, but now you're Freud, the therapist. And
Hmm.
then you coach yourself. Basically, you press a button and you go back and forth, back and forth. So it's kind of a Gestalt therapy technique to help people and through their struggles by themselves.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, that's a really cool one that they did several years ago. But they also did another one where they embodied people in the body of a black woman, and they had to look in the mirror first. Like there are some principles in how to get embodiment right. One of them is that you need initially some mirror to see yourself and to do some movements so that the movements in VR correspond with the actual physical movements.
Hmm.
And that's one of the techniques to build embodiment. And after that, they had two scenarios, one in which you um, are the black woman and people walk towards you. And in the first scenario, the people are friendly, they nod at you, they smile a little, and they go about their day. And in the second scenario, people are looking at you with a bit of disdain, a bit of hostility. Like it's not a very nice experience, and you feel like there's something wrong with me.
Hmm.
Um, and what you see are very different, contrasting results at the end. So the people who get friendly people walking towards them, they actually see a reduction of their implicit racial bias, which means that they associate less bad words with a person of a different race. And the opposite is true if you embody the black person with a crowd of hostile people walking towards you. Those people actually increased their implicit racial bias. So that's what we don't want. And this
Hmm.
experiment shows us something really important, that um, it can be true that VR is an empathy machine, but it depends on how you design the experience. And having like a hostile or a friendly crowd walking towards you is only one of the elements we can play with. There might be other elements that could increase or decrease your bias in ways that we still don't know. So I would say that embodiment can be very strong if you get the principles right. And as a spoiler alert, not many people actually get those basics right because it's
Mm,
not much known like what constitutes proper embodiment. Um, but even if you do get the embodiment right, it still depends on the experience you develop, whether it increases your empathy with the person or the object that you are
mm.
embodying.
How does the I'm curious about that the black women experiment. How does the anchoring work? Like for if I'm walking and experiencing myself as a black female, am I seeing kind of my hands or there must so you're saying there's a preliminary part where I can see my face or something and maybe move around to get the sense of like, oh, I'm looking at my reflection and then somehow be anchored in that identity.
Yeah, it's exactly like you said. So in the beginning,
Mm,
you see the mirror and you see the full body, or at least up from the torso. And her movements, or the avatar's movements, correspond with your actual movements of your own body. And that's how you get the initial feeling that you are this person now. It tricks your brains.
mm,
Uh, and then after that, the mirror disappears, but you can still see your hands attached to arms. So it feels realistic. It's not just some floating hands, because that can feel a little weird. It's like this long debate on the meta avatars without the legs, who now finally have the legs. Like, people are creeping out about them because
mm,
it's just weird if you don't have like your full body.
mm,
So when you're in a like first person point of view, all you really see when you're looking straight is your arms and your hands. And that because that's I guess because that's where we have a lot of nerves and neurons. We have a lot of sensitivity in our hands and fingers. I guess that's part of the reason why this part of our body is so important in embodiment, because we feel a lot of these, yeah, of our hands.
mm.
And our hands are very important in movement and manipulation of objects. So hands and arms are a crucial component of that embodiment.
Mm. There's another term I heard recently called digital twin. Is that also kind of what I think it is, where there's like a virtual doppelganger or something that you get to interact with?
It could be. In my definition, it would be. Digital twin is mostly used, like, I mean, at least within industry, for a copy, like a digital copy of a non-human thing. Like, mostly it's for a factory where, or a machine
Mm,
where
mm,
you
mm.
have like a real mechanical machine and you create like a digital twin of it with all the parameters and the data. And the advantage is that you can play around with it. I mean, you could basically play around with a whole factory if you decide
Got
to
it.
visualize it. And you can run experiments and see where things break the first. But a digital twin, I mean, it could be an avatar as well. It's less commonly used in this way. Um, but yeah, it could be.
Mm, mm. So, as we wrap up, I guess my final question for you is, what's most exciting for you in the context of these, say these three fields intersecting of VR, AI, and learning. What do you see as the most exciting developments that are on the horizon in the next, say, 1 to 5 years?
To to say it in a catchphrase, I would say that it makes learning more human or more natural. And I'll explain why I think that is,
Mm,
because it's a very cheap catchphrase, making learning more human. But I believe it's really true, because these next generations of devices allow us to interact with content, with information, and even with other human beings, regardless of their location, in a way that feels much more intuitive, that feels much more natural. Because right now we are having this conversation both sitting down at the desk, looking at like a luminescent box in front of us, and I only see you from the shoulders up. Still, we're having like a good interaction, and we get a lot of depth in our conversation. But the next level of that is when you have spatial audio, when you have a fully immersive environment, when you see people in front of you. Like, true, we would still be missing scent, for example, which is an important component. but from where we are now into 3 to 5 years from now, I feel like our interactions with both people and content will become more natural. The way
Mm,
we navigate virtual environments, the way we connect with people, the way we can play with our senses and even trick our brain into thinking something is real when in fact it's only virtual. Um, it will feel real to our bodies. And at the same time, like the second important component to me is to making learning more human, is that we will have many, many more sensors in these devices, for better or worse. But for better, we have much more information about our physiological states as human beings. And based on that, with the help of a bit of AI and a lot of safekeeping and cyber, just providing like a more natural learning environment that is catered to our psychological, emotional needs, to meet us where we are in this given moment and even help us become more in flow, more grounded by taking a couple of breaths, by getting a reminder, by even adapting the color schemes, which also has an impact on your state of
mm,
being. So all of those things that technology can bring us, that's where I get really excited because it makes learning more human, and people will have to scroll less through obligatory PowerPoint presentations or glorified e-learnings and actually have something more real to engage with and learn something from.
mm, mm. And hopefully, I mean, the other side of making learning more human is also virtual experiences that help us be more human, that somehow invite our humanity instead of suppressing our humanity in some way. I think that's one of the, at least for me, that's one of the most exciting things of having virtual environments where you can experiment with new ways of being and somehow develop soft skills in a safe space. I guess that's one thing we haven't really talked about, which is the safe space that a virtual environment offers, the safety that it offers to whether whether it's a social environment with other humans or just a virtual environment with a virtual avatar. But there is a certain safety there, and I wonder if you can speak about that a little.
I'm very glad you bring that up actually, because to me that's one of the most essential components, and I'm even shocked I haven't mentioned it explicitly before,
Mm,
but it's very much part of basically everything I said, why VR provides a benefit on top of anything else that we know in the realm of learning, because you are isolated within an environment where no one else can see what you see unless you choose to broadcast it. Also, when you're speaking with avatars where there is no human behind it, like nothing leaves the room and you can experiment whichever way you like, and there are no real life consequences to that. The only consequence is that you learn something useful, that maybe you fail, which is awesome because that's when you learn the most. And you can fail as many times as you want
mm,
because it's completely safe. You can practice speaking in front of an audience and forget your presentation speech and just hit the replay button because there is no consequences. Um, and there are so many ways in which the safety aspect of VR is beneficial to our learning process because we're not stressed. We are more free to experiment. We are more comfortable to fail, which I believe we should allow ourselves to be in real life as well. But VR can provide a stepping stone to be comfortable first within this safer space of VR, to then start to feel more comfortable within real reality. So it's a very interesting stepping stone to build our own confidence and safety, feelings of safety.
mhm.
And that way, it's a very potent technology indeed.
I think, yeah, and I'm gonna, this will be my last question here, but I know that a lot of people that might be watching, their biggest concern is that that VR completely disconnects you from the world. I hear a lot of people, they'll say snarky comments about, Mark Zuckerberg just wants to put everyone into his like, private universe or something, or that, AI is going to destroy humanity. And I guess what would you say and I think all of those concerns can be legitimate. You know, with this technology, there's all sorts of potentials that can be very detrimental to humanity. But on the other side of that, like what would you share to alleviate concerns about a threat to our humanity, or just to, you know, there's the existential threat of like humanity, but then there's just like the individual threat of getting sucked into a virtual environment and completely losing touch from reality. Like what would you say to, as a maybe as a hopeful note to end on, to alleviate concerns about things like that?
Yeah. First of all, I would like um, to appreciate those concerns because they're very real. At the same time, it is eventually the choice of all the many of us who are building this technology, using this technology. And the way that I like to view technology, it's like a hammer. It amplifies your intentions because you cannot hammer in a nail with your bare hands. I mean, you can, but it will be a long and painful process. Uh, a hammer just helps you do it better. So it amplifies your intention. The same goes for the agricultural revolution. Like we had a plow, we learned how to domesticate animals and even utilize some of them as a technology to help you sow seeds and farm crops and provide stability into your life, which I believe was a big factor when we got about the agricultural revolution. And the same is true to this new wave of emerging tech that we just talked about, AI, VR. We didn't even mention blockchain, but
Mm.
it's basically all of the same that we put our intentions in the products we build. We put our intentions in the technology we build, but also in how we use it. Because right now I could spend all my life watching all the content on Netflix. I could play all my time away into a zombie game in VR, and that would make me addicted as hell. So there's definitely the potential, but eventually I choose to do different things with this technology. So it's both on the side of the people developing this and providing options for you to engage with a certain type of technology and content. Um, in some cases, we are seeing very toxic applications of this technology. And we're also seeing very hopeful ones. So I would just say that it's a message to every individual, every organization, every leader and leadership team to be mindful about your intentions first. Take a deep breath and reflect on what you're actually doing. Take some time for ambition sessions, strategy sessions, and get your vision clear before you start to employ any kind of technology on a bigger scale. Because if you don't do that, you will have a very high risk of just repeating the intentions and the behavioral dynamics that you have been doing in the past. And they might be serving you, or maybe there are some components that are not very much serving you or your employees or stakeholders. So, yeah, long story short, start with the intention. And then I believe you will see a much more beautiful story of technology unfolding. So that's my hopeful message to alleviating some of these concerns.
We are the ones we've been waiting for. Thomas, thank you so much for just sharing your deep insight and wisdom in this territory. I learned so much today, and I'm excited to see what emerges here. I think for sure all these technologies that we mentioned, AI, VR, and blockchain, they're here to stay. You know, whether we like them or not, and I think that's the reality. That's the emerging reality. And so now we're left with our intention and collective capacity to develop them towards being truly supportive technologies for humanity. And I think that's ultimately what we all are left with, is the responsibility to take that seriously. Everyone, even if you think you're powerless, these technologies are not going away. And I think there is, and that's the thing. As much as there's potential to hurt humanity, there's also this incredible potential to serve humanity. And so it's exciting to unpack that a little bit with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's been a pleasure and very exciting. Yeah. It's awesome to being at this cusp of the new reality with you and everyone who is listening and looking at this. And I'm very curious to this once again, like next year or in 5 and 10 years. So maybe not on Zoom anymore.
We'll have to do an annual tradition and see how the medium evolves. And in 10 years, we'll be doing the virtual summit in a virtual world.
Hopefully still with the real Lorenzo, not with the digital avatar
The
twin.
digital twins will have the conversation. All right, Thomas, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.